Today's top stories, in depth, breaking news, and traffic and weather every 10 minutes first on the 5s.
105.9 FM.
And AM 630.
WMAL.
It is 5:06 on WMAL, and this is where Washington comes to talk. Good afternoon, I'm Larry O'Connor. You're listening to Washington's Drive at 5. Coming up at the bottom of this hour, the president has ordered 450 more troops to Iraq. Is that enough? Is that too many? We're going to speak with Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters, get the military perspective on this, not the political perspective. That's at the bottom of this hour, and we'll take your calls on that as well. Also, coming up in just 10 minutes, I want to follow up on the discussion we had on Monday about political correctness and stand-up comedians. Jerry Seinfeld doubling down on that. And this morning, comedian Colin Quinn also chimed in. We'll let you hear what they had to say. That's all coming up today on Washington's Drive at 5. But first,
she announced the charges, she took a moment to talk to the protesters in her city streets. Did you see that?
Yes.
What did you make of Marilyn Mosby that day?
She's not Freddie Gray's lawyer. She's a lawyer for the people. And that campaign speech, the election is over. She already won the election.
That is a Baltimore police officer with obviously a disguised voice speaking with CNN earlier today about state's attorney for Baltimore City, Marilyn Mosby, who still is now in the center of more controversy over the charges against those police officers and her potential conduct that might give her a conflict in that case. Joining us right now, Baltimore City Council member Carl Stokes to discuss this issue. Thanks for joining us, Councilmember Stokes.
Sure. Good to be with you, Larry.
So the latest revelation that was brought up in court yesterday was that Marilyn Mosby had actually asked for the police department to do a crackdown in that neighborhood, right where Freddie Gray was arrested. It was called Operation Ceasefire, quoting the memo, targeting that intersection for enhanced prosecutorial and hopefully police attention. And then it turns out that memo then inspired police department management to issue orders to officers to go forward and do daily narcotics initiatives with, quote, daily measurables that would be checked from them. Daily measurables means, what did you do? How many people did you stop? How many people did you check out? Is it possible that this sort of started that extra attention that led to Freddie Gray's arrest and, unfortunately, his death?
I don't know. I don't know that there's a conflict or there a direct line that says that increased enforcement and trying to keep a community safer would necessarily lead to possible bad behavior that results in the death of a citizen.
You mean bad behavior on behalf of the police?
Possibly, yes.
Okay. Well, when you say you don't know if there's a conflict, you, of course, I believe I've seen you say that the police do deserve to have their day in court and they deserve to have a robust defense.
Absolutely.
That
they should. I mean, they're certainly innocent, and we got a trial process. We have a jury, and I think that's where it should play out.
So, and I agree. I think any American would. Isn't it possible, based on this new information, that Ms. Mosby might be called to testify to explain exactly what her orders meant and what she was hoping to achieve?
Well, I don't know the process, frankly. I'm obviously a legislator and not involved in the judicial process or the prosecutorial or law enforcement. And so I guess I'm not trying to beg off the question. I just don't know, frankly, what the proper procedures are in this particular situation.
You just said something, Councilmember Stokes, talking about, more robust policing shouldn't have necessarily led to bad actions, and I don't disagree with that. But I'm confused, and I don't live in Baltimore. Listen, I live down here in Washington, but
Sure.
we certainly pay attention to what's going on in Baltimore. It appeared to me during all of the events of the last several weeks that many people from the community, many of your fellow council members were saying that part of the problem in West Baltimore was the robust policing. Some of the activities that started under the O'Malley mayor administration. So correct the record for me.
Right. There's no doubt about that. Here's where we're confused, frankly. We know that many of these communities, which have more than its share of bad activity and bad actors, are those who live there, the greater majority of good citizens. The greater majority are our moms, our dads, our grandparents, are retired citizens. Mrs. Jones, who's a widow, who's retired from the education system, and many kids. We know that the majority of those citizens are good citizens, but to be frank with you, their communities are not policed effectively. In other words, things that happen in those communities would not be allowed to happen in some other upper middle income neighborhoods, would not be allowed to happen. Open air drug markets would not be allowed to happen, and yet they are allowed to happen in many of these neighborhoods we're talking about. So what we're saying, and to say that we can have effective and good policing, and to say that can only happen by taking down people in a way that is against the police own policy and rules and possibly resulting in brutality. And if you have followed our local daily paper, you'll see that we have quite an unfortunate record of police brutality. Now, this is just a few officers. It's not the greater majority by any stretch of the imagination. So what I'm trying to say, I'm sorry I'm so long-winded,
No, right.
is that good policing and bad police tactics do not go side by side.
You said that these open air drug markets were allowed to exist and allowed to continue. Who's allowing it?
The elected officials and law enforcement. That's who's allowing it. We draw circles or lines around these communities, and we say on this side of the line, you cannot have open air drug markets. You cannot do, but people on this side who want drugs, who buy drugs, they are allowed to come across the boundary and buy their drugs open air on this side of the line. That's who's allowing it. We are allowing it.
And are you and your colleagues now, several weeks after the horrible events that we saw in West Baltimore, are you putting together some sort of new policies that will stop that? It sounds outrageous to me that you're saying that elected officials are allowing open air drug markets to occur. When will it stop?
Well, I'm not saying anything that's that outrageous that you or any other citizen can't see with your own eyes, and that the people who live there are so serious about the fact that they tell the police daily, and they tell their elected officials daily, who's doing drugs, where they live, what their names are, what they're wearing today, and what time these actions are taking place. And I got to believe that I'm not so naive that it doesn't happen in places like Washington, D.C. or boroughs in New York, or maybe it only happens in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. But in Baltimore, people do open-air drug markets, and they get away with it. And obviously, they get away with it in front of the eyes of elected officials and law enforcement.
All right, we're almost done. I wanted to ask you, Councilmember Stokes, because you made some headlines in your interview on CNN when you pushed back against the idea of the rioters being called thugs, and you used the N-word, and that really got a lot of headlines. Looking back on that, I think I know the point you were trying to make. Let's not judge the people; let's judge their behavior. But do you regret the way you communicated that, considering that became such a lightning rod issue?
No, I don't at all. I think if you follow a lot of what came behind that, I think the issue was. It should have been. You can't be PC correct all the time when people are really trying to soft pedal their racism or. So the issue was don't label according to behavior. You label the behavior.
But the president used that term the next day. He wasn't soft pedaling his racism, was he?
I have nothing to do with that.
Councilmember Carl Stokes, it's great to have you, and I really hope we can continue this. We keep an eye on Baltimore. We want to continue the conversation.
I appreciate you letting me have this conversation with you.
Thank you. It's 5:14.
Bye-bye.